Dark Cast Network. Out of the shadows comes the best of indie podcasts. To some, the woods can be a place of calm and peace. To others, grips them with fear and can feel as though they are being watched and claustrophobic. Tonight, with 2024's first episode, you will hear 3 stories of true crime involving mysterious deaths, haunting murders, and baffling disappearances. Fresh from my holidays vacation, thank you for tuning in. And as always, my name is DJ, and this is the Mythical True Crime Podcast. Hello and welcome to tonight's show. Again, thank you for tuning in and allowing me some time to recuperate after the holidays. I hope you all enjoyed yourselves. So let's get into these stories. Our first story tells a tale about an unidentified homicide victim who went unidentified for nearly 30 years. She was known as Tent Girl. This is her story. Wilbur Riddle, who had been scavenging for glass insulators along U.S. Route 25 near Georgetown, Kentucky, this happened on May 17, 1968, discovered a decomposing body wrapped in a large green canvas. It was a material such as it was used to wrap a tent together. The police investigation failed to identify the deceased woman or to name any suspects in her apparent murder. Despite her efforts being publicized of her description and check reports for missing women, no new leads happened in her case. Her remains were buried in 1971 in Georgetown Cemetery. A local company donated a headstone, which is inscribed as follows: Tent Girl, found May 17, 1968, on U.S. Highway 25. Died about April 26th through May 3rd, 1968. Age about 16 to 19 years. Height 5 foot 1 inch. Weight 110 to 115 pounds. Reddish brown hair. Unidentified. It also included an engraving of a police sketch meant to how she may have looked in her life. 30 years pass. And in April 1998, the Tent Girl was positively identified by the Scott County Sheriff's Office as Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor. They were aided in their efforts by a man named Todd Matthews, then 27, of Livingston, Tennessee. In the late 1980s, he married a daughter of Wilbur Riddle, who had found the young woman. Matthews heard about the missing woman, whose fate had haunted his father-in-law. He became intensely interested in the case, and, as the internet began to be frequently used for posting on public databases and volunteer websites of missing and unidentified persons, Matthew combed through many reports to help identify her. In 1997, he created his own website for Tent Girl, as another way to make people aware of her. That year, Matthews discovered a description of Taylor posted by the Hackman family on a missing persons website. They had a young married female relative who had gone missing in Lexington, Kentucky, approximately 15 miles from Georgetown, in late 1967. She had been living there with her husband and infant daughter. He later emailed the information on the Tent Girl to Rosemary Westbrook of Arkansas, who was listed as the contact for the family. She believed the information matched her missing sister and contacted the Scott County Sheriff's Department. They confirmed elements of her description of the sister, including a distinctive gap between the top 2 center teeth. The police arranged to exhume the body and extract DNA for analysis and potential match to the Hackman family members. A match was made, and on April 26, 1998, the sheriff's office confirmed the victim's identity as that of Barbara. She was survived by three sisters: Rosemary Westbrook of Benton, Arkansas, Jan Daggle from Placerville, California, and Marie Copeland from Arundel, Maine. In addition, Hackman Taylor's own daughter had been traced to Ohio, where her father's family had lived. She had married and had her own children by the time her mother was identified. The family chose to have Hackman's remains reinterred into George County Cemetery, with an additional stone placed under the original grave marker, bearing her birth name, nickname, date of birth, and presumed date of death, with the inscription, "Loving mother, grandmother, and sister." The Hackman family excluded Barbara's married name on her gravestone. The police later identified that her late husband, George Earl Taylor, as the primary suspect, as he worked for a circus at the time which used the tent material similar to that of which she was wrapped in. He had already died of cancer in October 1987. Now, after Taylor's identification, Matthews later on co-founded the Doe Network. It's a group that maintains an online database for volunteers dedicated to matchmaking missing persons with unidentified descendants. If you'd like to visit the website, they have over 600 volunteers, and the website is www.doenetwork.org. DOENETWORK.org. I'll also leave a link in the description below. Now, some detail on her late husband, George Earl Taylor. The only information I have again, he was a carnival worker and prime suspect in the murder case. He didn't file a missing person report at that time, but he told the family that she had left him for another man. He died of cancer in October 1987, but because he was the prime suspect, Hackman's family excluded his name when they commissioned the new tombstone from the gravesite. Now, with that quick story out of the way, here is another one involving a family death. The Jameson family deaths occurred on or after October 8, 2009, when the Jameson family of Eufaula, Oklahoma, United States, Bobby Jameson, with his wife Cheryl Lynn and daughter Madison, mysteriously disappeared. The family was reported considering a purchase of a 40-acre plot in the land near Red Oak, about 30 miles from the city they lived in, at the time that they vanished. The initial investigation into the Jameson family's disappearance indicated that they had probably not vanished on their own accord. The family's pickup truck was found abandoned in Latimer County, Oklahoma, which was a short distance from Kinta, a few days after their disappearance. The Jamesons' bodies were not found, and their malnourished dog, Maisie, was still in the truck. Also discovered there were the family's ID cards, wallets, mobile phones, a GPS system, and around $32,000 in cash. The Jamesons were not known for carrying large amounts of cash with them. Footage from the family's home surveillance system time-stamped the day that they left their house, which showed the couple making several silent trips between their vehicle and the home as though they had methodically packed to leave. The footage, the couple's movements were described as trance-like. The video also shows Cheryl Lynn place a large brown briefcase inside the vehicle. Former Sheriff Beauchamp remarked that he believes that this briefcase could be an important clue, because both the briefcase and Cheryl Lynn's handgun have never been recovered. After this quick message, we'll be right back. Hello there, listeners. Whether you're new or you've been with me from the start, a great way to catch up and dive deeper into the world of mythical true crime is to check out my earlier shows. I've covered everything from Bigfoot to aliens and ghosts. Take a moment and browse through the past episodes, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Your support means everything to me. The skeletal remains of two adults and a child were discovered by two hunters in a remote spot in Latimer County in November 2013, more than 4 years after the family went missing. Less than 3 miles away from where the vehicle's pickup truck had been abandoned. The remains were widely presumed to be those of that missing family, though the Oklahoma Medical Examiner's Office had to use anthropological and forensic pathology testing to identify them. Officials confirmed July 3, 2014, that the remains belonged to that of the Jamisons. A cause of death had not been determined due to the heavily decomposed state of the bodies. Now, several theories were formed, including some paranormal ones, before the remains were discovered. Theories emerged that the family's disappearance was that to them faking their own deaths, were in a witness protection, were murdered, or had died by group suicide. Shortly before the disappearance, Bobby Jamison was involved in a bitter lawsuit with his own father, Bob Dean Jamison, claiming that he had threatened the family and had struck him with his vehicle in November 2008. Bobby also alleged that his father was involved in meth and criminal activity. Police do not believe that Bob Dean Jamison was involved in the family's disappearance. One of the more popular theories, however, was that the Jamisons themselves were the drug dealers. Investigators cited that the large amount of cash found in their truck and the apparent strange behavior exhibited by Bobby and Cheryl Lynn before they went missing proves this. The Jamisons had reportedly told their local pastor, Gary Brandon, on separate occasions that they had seen spirits inside their home, and that Bobby had allegedly claimed to have been reading from the Satanic Bible. No cause of death again was determined, and the circumstances surrounding their disappearances remain unknown. And with that, our final story tonight involves the disappearance of Brandon Swanson. A native to Marshall, Minnesota, Brandon Swanson graduated from Marshall High School in 2007. He then chose to study wind turbines for a year at the Minnesota West Community and Technical College campus in Canby. Classes at Minnesota West ended for the academic year on May 13, 2008. Swanson stayed in Canby for the evening to celebrate with friends. At 2 different parties, he was witnessed drinking alcohol, but, his friends said, not enough to make him seem visibly intoxicated. Swanson left Canby for a 30-mile drive home before midnight. Just before 2 a.m., he called his parents on his cell phone, telling them he had driven his Chevrolet Lumina off the road and into a ditch, from which he could not remove the car. He wasn't hurt, but he did ask them to come where he was so they could pick him up. Annette and Brian Swanson both got in their pickup truck and drove out to where they thought he was, keeping him on the phone despite occasional hang-ups and call drops. Brandon stayed with his car and tried to get a signal by flashing them with his lights on and off, but they saw nothing. Nor did Brandon see them when they did the same. Brandon finally gave up and told them that he was leaving the car to walk towards lights he can see that led him to believe he was near Lind, a small town roughly 7 miles southwest of Marshall. He told his father to head to the parking lot at a local bar and wait for him there. Brian began driving there, talking to his son as they did. Shortly after 2:30 a.m., 47 minutes into the call, Brandon suddenly interrupted himself on the phone and said, "Oh shit!" That was the last thing they ever heard from their son. He was silent for the remainder of the call until his parents hung up and made multiple attempts to call him back. At 6:30 a.m., his parents reported Brandon missing to the Lind police. They were first told that it was hardly unusual for young men at that age to stay out all night after the last day of college classes. Annette Swanson specifically recalled that one of the officers said it was Brandon's, quote, right to be missing. Later that morning, the Lind police did start a search, but found no trace of Brandon in town or outside of it. They requested that the office of Lynn County Sheriff Joel Dahl assist them. To better focus on the search, the sheriff's office obtained Brandon's cell phone records, which revealed Brandon had been calling from the vicinity of Taunton, which was State Highway 68, the main route to Canby, northwest of Marshall, 25 miles away from Lynn. Searching in that area, deputies did discover Brandon's abandoned car in a ditch off a gravel road along the Lincoln County line a mile north of Highway 68, bringing the office to that county sheriff, Jack Vizecki, into the investigation as well. He told the media that the Lumina had gotten hung up on top of the incline at the edge of the road, but not serious enough to where the car was damaged to keep it from wheels from touching the ground. There was nothing else found amiss on the car, and due to the grass and gravel in the area, there were no tracks, thus no way to tell what direction Brandon might have been started walking. His cell phone call had been routed through a tower at the intersection of county routes 3 and 10 near Minota, another town along Highway 68. By May 15th, the call had been determined to come from within 5 miles of the tower. Searchers were concentrating their efforts there. Since part of the circle included Yellow Medicine County to the north, authorities from that jurisdiction also took part. Now, Dahl noted from that area a red light atop of the Taunton grain elevator that could be seen. He thought it had been possible that that was the red light Brandon had seen, and led him to believe that Lynn was within walking distance. Ground searches were being contemplated with a flyover of an aerial team. Search dogs were also brought in from the Twin Cities. A team of bloodhounds from nearby Cottington County, South Dakota, picked up a 3-mile scent trail that largely followed a field road west-northwest of an abandoned farm. Then along the Yellow Medicine River to a point where it appeared to enter a stream. Brandon mentioned passing fences and hearing nearby water, his father recalled. On the theory that Brandon might have drowned, boats from the state's Department of Natural Resources were deployed along the river and gates were installed. In some areas of Lincoln County, the water had been 10 feet deep on the morning of the disappearance, but had gone down since then, Dahl noted. Deputies also walked the riverbanks and the horse trails and using all-terrain vehicles deploying in the surrounding area. Dahl ruled out a more organized, extensive ground search, however. After the original search found no signs of Swanson, most efforts were discontinued. Sheriff Vizecki continued to walk about 2 miles of the Yellow Medicine area every day for 30 days. The Swansons left their porch light on all night, every night, as a symbol of hope that Brandon would eventually return and be found, and still do till this day. Searches resumed later in that fall, after fields planted shortly after the disappearance had been harvested. Dogs on those searches continued to follow scents of human remains in that area northwest of Porter that had not been searched earlier. Efforts picked up again in the spring after snow melted, but before planting, a cycle that continued all the way through 2011. By that time, 122 square miles, or 320 kilometers, had been searched. In 2010, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension took over as lead agency on the case. It set up a tip line, and by 2015, only 90 leads had been reported that way. By that point, the official search resumed, and the area of interest had moved towards Mud Creek, which was a creek system of the Yellow Medicine north and northwest of Porter. Now, several theories came out of this. While the trail followed, one of the dogs went to Yellow Medicine, and despite her son's last known words, Annette Swanson does not think he was drowned there. After following the scent in the water, the dog continued up across the other side, and along that riverbank to another gravel road, where it continued north towards the Yellow Medicine County line and ended. There, quote, "There really is nothing to indicate that he's in the river," she told CNN. Brian Swanson also recalls that any alcohol his son had consumed earlier in that evening notwithstanding, that he did not seem disoriented or confused enough during their phone calls. If Swanson was still alive, there are other possibilities, though they appear remote. He could have intentionally disappeared, but his parents don't believe that he would have done that. Vizecki also said that he couldn't rule out foul play, even though there was no evidence of it. Quote, "Someone could have been in the shadows, and they probably got him that way." He speculated, of course. After the searches, Annette Swanson was still struck by the initial response that the Lynn police had for her son, quoted in saying he had a right to be missing when she told him how old he was. "I'm his mother and I knew something was horribly wrong," she recalled later. She and Brian began lobbying for changes of state law, which would require an investigation into a case of a missing adult to begin as soon as it's reported, much as it already required for cases of possibly abducted children. Annette met with Marty Seffert, minority leader of the State House of Representatives at the time, whose district included Marshall, in a local restaurant. The two talked about problems she had experienced with the police when she reported her son missing. Quote, Marty recalled she knew it wouldn't help her in her son's case, but it could help others in the future. Seffert introduced a bill called Brandon's Law, which would require the change amending the law governing the state's existing missing childs program to change the word child to person. He recalled considerable resistance from the state's law enforcement community as it was developing in committee. Quote, part of it had to do with privacy, especially regarding cell phones at the time. Technology was emerging then, so there were discussions about privacy and when they can ping you and when they can't. Dennis Frederickson introduced a companion bill to the state Senate. After it passed both houses, the House had passed unanimously, in May 2009, Governor Tom Pontley signed it into law, with the Swansons and their daughter in attendance at the ceremony. The effect of that change also required that police, in addition to determining in their preliminary investigation that the reported person is indeed missing, determine whether that person is potentially in dangerous circumstances. They also must notify other nearby law enforcement agencies promptly. Brandon's Law also clarifies that the agency taking the report is the lead agency investigating that case. The absence of that distinction had created problems that were later phases of the initial search when 3 different counties were involved. Police were no longer allowed to refuse to report based on the initial belief that no criminal activity was involved. The brevity of the interval since the person was last seen, and the possibility that the person may have intentionally disappeared, or lack of relationship between the missing person and the reporter of the missing person. Following the governor's signature, the law took effect at the beginning of July 2009. 4 other states have passed similar laws. Seffert left the legislature in 2010, but he is still the pen Pontley used to sign the bill into law. Quote, I consider it one of the most important bills I authored in my 14 years. It will save lives. And that concludes another captivating episode, delving into the world of mythical true crime. I appreciate you joining me tonight as we listen to the facts from these true crime tales. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll uncover even more mysteries. Until then, thank you for listening to tonight's episode. Good night.